Rev up your engines!
GM has a lawsuit against them now, saying that they were selling diesel pickup trucks in the United States that couldn't run correctly on American fuel. It turns out that a bunch of them had Bosch German fuel pumps. It's refined slightly differently. So it's wearing the fuel pumps out. The fuel pumps are throwing metal shavings into the fuel injection system and destroying them. Of course, GM denies all this stuff. I mean, they seem to deny everything. They denied that ignition switch thing where they even changed the number of the ignition switch replacement part so people wouldn't notice that the old ones were designed wrong, and then they got sued, and then they had to pay out a bunch of money for that stuff that they were doing, and now they're claiming that, oh no, that's not the case. Well, I mean, if people are having problems with them, only time's going to tell us what happens with it, but I think it's kind of interesting, you know? They couldn't even design their own fuel pumps. They're buying the German fuel pumps, and they didn't even probably think, well, boy, they put them in the vehicles. Jackie Mayhouse says, Scotty, what would be a great first car for about $2,000? If you want reliability, get an old Corolla or an old Camry. Now, for $2,000, it's odds are it's going to be pretty old. You don't get much for $2,000 these days. $2,000 today is equivalent to, when I was a kid, to a $100 car. And usually you can get much for a $100 car. Do the old trick that I've always told people to do. You can pay that much money for a car, get one where the paint's peeling off. They don't have any value when the paint's peeling off. And then if you really care, go to one of those places like Earl Scheib that'll paint a car when they're having a sale for $250. Or one that's got bashed in fenders. It still works good, but when they look bad, they go for a lot less money. Priptel Singh says all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive for the winter. All-wheel drive works better in the winter. You got all the wheels driving it. But do you really need that much? As an example, my mother's 92. She still lives in Niagara Falls. She drives a Toyota Corolla front-wheel drive car in the snow. Doesn't even put snow tires on. They plow the roads in Niagara Falls, and she never has any problems. Now, if you're going skiing and mountains and stuff, all-wheel drive is much better. Front-wheel drive is pretty good. And, of course, rear-wheel drive is the worst for snow because you spin around. It turns out that vehicles are more controllable if you pull them rather than push them. So with front-wheel drive, you got better snow control than rear-wheel drive because you're pulling instead of pushing. But if you live where they plow the roads, you really don't care one way or another. Most cars are front-wheel drive these days anyways. Klavdik said, why shouldn't you use full synthetic on an engine that stayed semi-synthetic? 97 Ford Puma. You could if you would have from the very beginning. But my advice to people, and our engineers have argued this back and forth with me, but I don't care. I've seen it happen. You have an engine that you've been using regular oil or semi-synthetic oil, and you switch to full synthetic oil, and it's been using the other oil for a long time. A lot of times they'll either start burning or leaking oil because the full synthetic oil flows better, is thinner, and a lot of times it'll leak or burn oil. Sometimes the engines start making noises. If you started out with it, you generally don't have that problem, but I would just leave it alone today. If you want to buy a new car and put full synthetic, go right ahead. But don't switch after it's had 100,000 miles of some other type of oil. Jacob Rogers says, Scotty, I got a 98 Chevy S10 with a locked up 4-cylinder. Can it be unlocked? If your engine's locked up, it means it has internal problems. And odds are you're going to have to take it all apart and rebuild it, or in that old clunker, try to find a used engine from a junkyard and put in it. If you want to try, you can get a long extension bar in a socket, put it on the front crank pulley bolt, try turning it back and forth, and if you can break it loose, say take the spark plugs out, put oil in them, leave the spark plugs out with oil in the holes. If you can break it loose, maybe you can get it running again. Who knows? I've done that sometimes in the past. Donald Goss says, how often should you change brake fluid? Love your channel and all your information and tips. I personally have had Toyotas that had 250,000 miles on it. I never changed the brake fluid and never had to change anything but the brake pads. The cylinders didn't leak. But on the other hand, if you got some piece of junk like a Chrysler, I change the fluid in them every 4 or 5 years. They're not made that well, and they will absorb a lot of water vapor and have problems. If you really want to see if yours is any good, there are tests that we mechanics can do. We have little machines that test for the percentage of water in them and the percentage of copper, because a lot of times the copper from the lines will infiltrate into it and it won't work as well. So it can be tested. If you got an honest mechanic, he can test it for you, tell if it's good or not. Russ Rago says, Scotty, my 2010 Corolla tires spin when I hit a bump. Okay, if you get spinning tires, half the time it's just the tires are worn out. or they're crappy tires. If you buy crappy tires, if the rubber isn't soft enough, it's too hard, it will actually spin. You hit a bump and hits and it spins because it's too hard and it slips. You want to have tires that are reasonably soft so they grip. If you watch any of those car races, you might think tires in those car races, they're changing them every 110 miles because they're so soft and they're going so fast that they just erase themselves going around a track at that speed and at that temperature. You don't want tires that last 150 miles, but you don't want really hard ones that skip. Check the tires first. If it's not the tires, generally it's the shocks wearing out and then they're bouncing and slipping after you hit a bump. And Jeremy Senzone says, what do you think of body kits? Well, if you want to make your car look different, go ahead and bolt it on. It doesn't, generally affect how they run or anything. Problem I see with them, I see a lot of kids that put body kits on these Honda Civics. They put them way too low, and then the pieces get ripped off every time they go over a speed bump or they hit something, and pieces come flying off. Go ahead and do whatever you want. It's your car. I personally think, hey, the way they're made is good enough for me. They're transportation devices, and motorcycles, generally, my thing with them is naked. Take everything off of them, just have a motor and wheels. So I don't want any body on them at all. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.